You've got a new book coming out in a couple of weeks. We have a mock cover here because it's not out yet. Black Rednecks and White Liberals by Thomas Sowell. Over 30 books published. How important is this book to you?
Probably, it may be the most important because there are so many misconceptions about racial and ethnic issues that just straightening out the misconceptions is a major task in itself. I don't reach any kind of policy conclusions in this book because, as I say, it's just it's a full-time job to get the facts straightened out.
Well, let me read what you say in your preface. You say, "Let me state here, and now that these essays do not mean, 1, all Southern whites were or are rednecks, 2, all black Americans today or in the past were or are black rednecks, 3, Jews are exactly the same as the other groups with whom they are compared, and that 4, slavery is somehow morally acceptable because everyone was guilty of it. One cannot predict," you write, "much less forestall all the clever misinterpretations that others might put on one's words. The most that can be done is to alert honest people to the problem." Explain all that.
Well, I've found that people do an awful lot of twisting of what you say. What you have actually said goes completely against what they've believed for a long time and want to continue to believe. And so they go off on all kinds of tangents. What I find is that happens with intellectuals much more so than with the general public. Whereas I can write a column in a newspaper aimed at the general public, and there'll be extremely few misunderstandings of what I said. I can say the same things in a book that's aimed at intellectuals, and there'll be incredible twists and turning. Well, you seem to say this further than that. I remember one huge review trying to figure out the implications of ethnic America. What made it a farce was that the last chapter of the book is titled Implications. So you don't have to guess what the implications I drew. They're right there. But I strongly suspect the person who wrote the review never got that far.
You also said in your preface, because this book is written for the general public, it does not feature long, convoluted sentences with escape clauses designed to prevent words from being twisted.
Yes, because again, I've seen that the clever people will do that. And so I write for the people who are the general public and for those intellectuals who are honest, and the rest of them I write them off.
Black rednecks, who are they?
These would be blacks who came out of the Southern culture and who carried that culture with them north into the urban ghettos and into the ghettos of the South for that matter. And who have not moved out of that culture since. Over the years, both blacks and whites have moved away from that culture. But in the poorest and worst of the ghetto areas, there are lots of people who have not. And these kinds it's a culture which didn't do whites any good, and it's certainly not doing blacks any good today. And the tragedy is that people regard this culture as somehow the authentic black culture, and therefore you're not to interfere with it. It's to be allowed to, and so they're cheering people on. It reminds me of a scene in the Blue Max where this general is encouraging this daredevil pilot to do all kinds of wild stunts, you see, knowing that the guy's going to kill himself if he keeps doing this, and therefore the general will be rid of a political problem. Now, I don't think that the white liberals are doing this deliberately, but I think the net results are the same. They are cheering blacks on and doing things that are absolutely self-destructive.
What's the difference between a black redneck and a white redneck?
Color.
Same kind of people, same attitudes?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and same kind of results. One of the things I point out in this book is that, you know, as late as the First World War, when mental tests were given in the Army, there were whites from any number of southern states who scored lower on those tests than blacks from northern states. So that anyone who comes out of that culture is likely to score lower on mental tests, to do less well in intellectual areas, whether they're black or white.
Now, what do you say somebody watching this says Thomas Sowell lives in an ivory tower? He lives in that Hoover institution. He doesn't have contact with these kind of people. How do you know these people?
I was 50 years old when I came to the Hoover Institution, so it was not I was a young lad fresh out of school. And I grew up in far worse poverty than most people today who are considered to be in poverty.
So your other part of the title is white liberals. How do you define a white liberal?
Those kinds of people who have the kinds of attitudes that are called liberal in the United States, although the word is misused. You know, Ted Kennedy in politics, any number of people in the media among an intelligentsia, Larry Tribe in the law and so on. Those people have created an atmosphere in which these counterproductive cultures are to be celebrated, perpetuated, and the consequences overlooked.
What's the difference between a white liberal and a black liberal?
Color.
Same people.
Yes.
Same attitude.
Yes.
You have a chapter, that's the first chapter is Black Rednecks and White Liberals. The second chapter is Are Jews Generic?
Mm-hmm.
Why the jump from Black Rednecks and White Liberals to Are Jews Generic? What's the point?
Well, this book is really about ethnic and cultural issues in general. So there's a chapter on the Jews, there's a chapter on the Germans, and then there's a chapter on history in general. So they're lumped together because they're all cultural ethnic issues. We move on to the Jews simply because it's a fascinating story, because among the middleman minorities, of which the Jews are the most prominent, the hostility to these people in countries around the world is out of all proportion to any other kind of group I can think of. In terms of violence, the number of Chinese killed, let's say, in 1 year, and by mob action, exceeds all the blacks lynched in the entire history of the United States. And the number of Armenians killed in Turkey, during the First World War, is greater than that. And of course, the number of Jews slaughtered on a number of occasions in history, even before the Holocaust, is greater than that. So that the question is, why this particular kind of people are the targets of so much venomous hatred? And I think the answer is that they not only succeed, they succeed in a way which is a threat to the egos of other people. That is, you can envy a Rockefeller, but he's no threat to your ego, because you say, listen, anybody can be rich if he's born a Rockefeller. But the guy who comes here, let's say from Vietnam or Korea, and arrives here with little more than the clothes on his back and a few words of broken English, and a decade later, he has his own little business, and you see his son a few years after that getting ready to go off to Harvard or MIT. You got to ask yourself, you either got to, you've got to hate yourself for saying, my God, I've been stagnating. This guy was nothing, and now he's risen up, or you're going to have to hate him. And most people, when they have a choice between hating others and hating themselves, they hate others.
Where does the hatred for the Jews come from in history?
Number of places, but they are people who have succeeded an awful lot in the midst of other people who have not. Years ago, one official of one of the Jewish organizations in New York asked me, what can Jews themselves do in order to minimize the hostility they face? And I gave him a one-word answer: fail. Because as long as you succeed, you're going to be hated.
So the source is success.
It's not only the success, it's the success starting in poverty, as the Jews did in the United States and in many other countries. And so you not only see them succeed, you see them rise up from the bottom, past other people, and the people they've passed don't like it. But there's also the fact that the role they play economically has never been understood. They're middlemen or they're money lenders, and the argument is they really aren't producing anything. You can't see anything tangible, that they don't stand at a production line turning out widgets. And so the argument is that they're not producing anything. They're simply gratuitously inserting themselves between the producer and the consumer, and they're parasites, essentially. And this argument has been made, again, not only about the Jews, but about similar groups around the world. And in a number of places, they have expelled those people or forced them out by mob actions, forced them to flee. And after they left, the economy has collapsed. But it never teaches the lesson to know they were doing something.